I didn't want to be a regional administrative assistant for the rest of my life. I knew that I had talent, I had skills, and I just needed to hone in on those talents and skills in a way that allowed me to get paid for those talents and skills. And, like I said, this became my life's mission because I was like, what's important to me? You know what's important to me? The fact that I want every student, every youth to have an education. So having higher ed accessible to the masses was important to me. And I was like, how do I get there? How do I get them there? And then there was like fundraising through development work, how do we get more internal and external stakeholders to invest and be philanthropic? And so that was my life. Well, that's been my life for the past 23 years.
Welcome to Career Cheat Code. In this podcast, you'll hear how everyday people impact the world through their careers. Learn about their journey, career hacks, and obstacles along the way. Whether you're already having the impact you want or are searching for it, this is the podcast for you. All right. Yanira, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Appreciate you taking the time to join the Career Cheat Code podcast today. Let's just dive right in. Let's tell the world what it is you do for a living.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Radhy. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor. As you know, my name is Yanira Amadeo, and I am currently an executive director of development at University of Connecticut Foundation.
What does that mean? What does that mean on like a day-to-day? You walk in on a Monday, you do some good things. It sounds really fancy, but what are you actually tasked with doing?
So if I had to think about it, I would consider myself a philanthropic strategist, higher ed leader, really with, I have over 2 decades of experience working in higher ed at various institutions. And it's really about helping students and families access life-changing opportunities through education.
So you are working with the foundation of the university?
Yes.
To raise funds, and what do you all ultimately do with those funds?
So a lot of the funds goes back into student life. It goes back into research priorities. It basically supports the function of the university, students first, obviously, and then other parts of the university that potential investors might find fascinating to invest back in.
That's awesome. So hypothetically, as someone that now has a kid that's going off to college, right? These are the parts that keep the university running that he may not see, right? But part of the reason why maybe his financial aid package looks the way it is because of some of the work that you're doing, why some of the new facilities that are coming online, like a new renovation to a gym are happening, or a new lab. Are those the type of things that you're working on?
Absolutely. My work really bridges generosity and justice. So whether I'm raising millions for scholarships or mentoring future fundraisers or helping alumni direct their investments in research for faculty members and what specific colleges have going on as far as trying the social impact of, right now I'm in Connecticut, so social impact of Connecticut and beyond. That's really my day to day.
Wow. That sounds great. What's your favorite part of your role?
Really, it's the relationship building, the connecting to other people. I often, as a strategist, I'm constantly thinking about ways to get more alumni, more external and internal stakeholders involved in what the university is doing and the impact it could have broadly. So for me, I love going on meetings, attending a research symposium, or interacting with student mentor groups. That's like really the highlight of my time and my day during the week while I'm there.
So it sounds like you have a task to both interact with people internally within the university and externally, and hearing what faculty, what student groups, what administration needs, and then trying to find some of the funding to support those priorities, and then going externally and finding people that align with that. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What some folks don't realize is that philanthropy and development work, it's a bridge. It bridges people. It connects what the university has going on, what the students are doing, faculty and staff with the broader community. And so it really intersects, possibility and purpose. So my role is not really about just raising money. It's really about creating access and building equity to transform those student lives.
That's great. What do you think are some of the skills that you need for this type of role? Or like, what do you see yourself really tapping into for the most part?
I would say definitely you need to be a leader, have high leadership skills and entrepreneurial skills, and really have the ability to move people and move initiatives that the university is having so that you can get those internal and external stakeholders to invest and support.
What do you think is the least favorite or most challenging part of your role in development?
It's funny you ask. I don't really have a least favorite because I really consider this my life's mission. And so for me, this is not work. I come every day with a smile on my face because I know that I have impact students' lives. And, once I decided that I wanted to go this route into higher ed development work, I knew that, first I took the steps to get my credentials, but then I also, I'm able to learn from, I have a peer mentor groups, and I also have other executive leader mentor groups that I tap into as a resource. So for me, I don't really have like a least favorite thing.
That's awesome. That is, I'm sure, not the case for a lot of folks. I'm glad that you can find that as your calling, your vocation in development, specifically in the university level.
Well, that old adage, if you do what you love, it's not work. It's true.
So let's work backwards now. So let's talk about your upbringing. You mentioned, once you found that this was your calling, one, do you feel like this has always been your calling?
No. So I went to St. John's for psychology with a social work minor. And I thought I was going to change the world, become this social worker and really help children and youth thrive in that way. And, I was a counselor for a group home for young women for 2 years after college. And I just realized very quickly that that wasn't the direction that I wanted to do with my life. And I had to pivot. And so, that failing at that really, and it wasn't like failing, like, oh my God, I was horrible. It was just that it's a really demanding, mentally heavy position. And I wanted to do something that didn't make me feel like coming into work was a chore, or coming into work was to hear the trauma of these young ladies was just affecting me mentally. And so I had to pivot and really develop a plan for what I wanted my life to look at. And, I was looking at what I really love to do. And so in college, being part of a sorority, it really got me going with the philanthropic activities. We were always fundraising for this or that. And it gave me the bug to fundraise. And then I was like, as I'm figuring things out as a regional executive at assistant, I'm thinking, how can I incorporate fundraising in my life? And that just started, I started doing some research, and I realized that there were some programs out there for nonprofit management. And that's when I earned my nonprofit management degree from Columbia University. And it was such a life changer for me because it really, everything that I've been wanting to do, it allowed me to understand it theoretically. And then once I graduated, I was able to put it into practice.
Wow. And were you also working at Columbia during that time?
I was indeed. So I started after my regional role. I was a regional executive assistant at a security firm. My boss was like, great guy, love him today, but he was like, Yanira, he's like, you're too good for this role. What do you really want out of life? Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? And I said, I've always wanted to be in the higher ed space. And it was a security firm, not like securities, but it was a security firm, and they just happened to have ties to Columbia University. And he goes, I may know someone who can make an introduction. And sure enough, I didn't believe him, but he absolutely made an introduction, and I was able to begin my career at Columbia. And I was there for about 12 years before I moved on.
That's great. And I also, I really appreciate that you shared that, you're able to also go to school and get a master's from Columbia while you're there, right? Because I think one of my biggest career cheat codes is working at a university and getting a master's paid for, right? Especially if you can go do that at a place like Columbia. Now you have an Ivy League degree and you're doing it with, one of the biggest benefits that come to you as an employee, right? Like technically, if you're not taking advantage of all of your benefits, you're probably underpaid, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can add to that and say that you're absolutely right. But one thing that people, I also don't want to put the misconception out there that once you're an employee, it's an automatic thing because I think I still had to apply. I still had to fill out my application, write an essay, do everything I had to do for the program. And I have to tell you, I was on pins and needles wondering if I was going to get in. And then when I got in, I was like, oh my gosh, and it definitely was satisfying that I was able to achieve that. But I think what was more rewarding was the fact that that degree really aligned with my passion. And it's really helped me in my career since then. And so I would definitely credit if you're at a university and you kind of like stuck and you feel like, oh, they put me in this box, I can never get out of this box. That's a surefire way to get out of the box. Get your education, look into things that you might, find interesting, because I didn't want to be a regional administrative assistant for the rest of my life. I knew that I had talent, I had skills, and I just needed to hone in on those talents and skills in a way that allowed me to get paid for those talents and skills. And, like I said, this became my life's mission because I was like, what's important to me? You know what's important to me? The fact that I want every student, every youth to have an education. So having higher ed accessible to the masses was important to me. And I was like, how do I get there? How do I get them there? And then there was like fundraising through development work. How do we get more internal and external stakeholders to invest and be philanthropic? And so that was my life. Well, that's been my life for the past 23 years.
So in those 12 years at Columbia, what role did you originally start with and what role did you end up leaving with? I'm just trying to get a sense of the growth that you can have internally within an organization and how your portfolio can shift.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I will say I worked my way up the ladder. I started because remember, I was coming from being a regional executive assistant so I started as an admin. I was like an admin coordinator, but then I quickly went up into like project manager, and I think I was promoted like at least 3 or 4 times while at Columbia. And a lot of my earlier years at Columbia, I was doing a lot of event work. And I remember I had a portfolio of like, I think it was like $175,000 that the university had allocated to do community events. And when the university was trying to expand into Manhattanville, they started to shift their focus into not necessarily supporting groups in that way, but to support groups in other ways, technical support, fundraising support. And so then it became a whole community issue. And I really liked that it was community-based because that really let me understand what the community cared about regarding philanthropy and how an institution as large as Columbia can really make an impact and be a good neighbor to their neighbors.
Absolutely. And that's how you and I met, right? Like you were doing a lot of work with Columbia Community Service and,
yes.
Our paths overlapped as I worked at Columbia and just me learning about the work that you all were doing. And I gravitated towards that, right? Because I always kind of knew that I was going to go into philanthropy at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of gravitated to the work that y'all are doing, and you all were so community driven, community focused, that it just spoke to me. So, I definitely commend you on all the great work that you all did to support a lot of local organizations, leverage the employee funds that were available, and try to like make some good alignment with like, how do we support the community just as employees here?
Yes.
Now, so you're leaving Columbia. As you're going to, after 12 years, make a big leap, right? Because after you're somewhere for 12 years, it is easy to just say, I'm just going to ride this out and stick around for a little longer. What ultimately made you decide to make the shift, and what kind of roles were you looking for?
That's a great question. So ultimately what happened is that once I earned my degree, then I just got the bug. I wanted to save the world in a whole other different light. So I was like, I've done community development work. I wanted to understand higher ed in a different space of understanding how to build up alumni development. And that's when it really sat with me how the alumni connection to institutions was very important. And so I had an opportunity. I was recruited to Pace University. I had an opportunity there and actually was at their law school. And I did alumni development work there, great people and out of Westchester. And From there, I then went to Montclair State, which is the second largest public university in New Jersey. And then all of these experiences really allowed me to hone my alumni development work and my major gift work. That was just an eye opener for me because I realized that I had this talent for being able to build relationships with alumni, with external stakeholders who may not be alumni, but were so invested in the institution's greatness and the institution's ability to make change and affect social changes that I was like, oh, this is exactly where I want to be. This is exactly what I want to do. And, I do credit Columbia University with, give me those tools, those theoretical tools. But don't get me wrong. Anyone, like if you do not have, let's say, a nonprofit management degree, there are ways to break into the sector. And, yes, I had that degree from Columbia, but I also used a lot of my degree from St. John's in psychology and social work to really understand those nuances with building relationships.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because you're somewhere for 12 years, right? And then you get this master's degree and it sounds like that almost kind of catapulted or sparked something in you to like own your career even more, right? And go to Pace, go to Montclair, and understand how you can continue to grow and not only leverage the experience that you had, but also the degrees that you had, right? Because Columbia, being at a place like Columbia or at an Ivy League or at one of those really renowned institutions, the experience that you bring from there is much more valuable outside of that place. Someone at it, especially if you're trying to stay in higher ed, right? Like someone's always going to say, well, we would love to do what Columbia's doing. How do you bring that here? We would love to learn about how to leverage your master's degree from that type of institution over here, and let's bring that talent here. So it just sounds like that sparked now kind of a trajectory that has snowballed into where you are today.
Absolutely, yes, it has. Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that.
No, for sure. I think it's really commendable, and you and I have had conversations through the years, but I just I love to see people that are like just owning their careers and like going for what they feel like is their calling and all the things. So now you're at UConn now.
Yes.
So it sounds like a pretty similar role to some of the work that you were doing at Columbia. Just of course now you're in a much bigger leadership position and leading a lot of the strategy. Tell me more about how you are able to ingrain yourself in different communities, right? Because Columbia is in Harlem, then you have Montclair in New Jersey, now you have UConn in Connecticut. Like, how are you able to like still make those connections and understand kind of how to bring those communities together?
Part of the role is, well, right now at UConn, I have a team and we're able to, develop strategies for the largest college at the university. But I think the reason why I'm able to work in various populations is because I'm just a firm believer that philanthropy isn't just for the wealthy. It's how we pass on power. And so there's power in being able to give generously and see another person thrive. And so that's what I do. And that's how I connect people back to the university. And that can be applied to any university. That could be applied to any institution. So for me, that's really been the impetus for being able to adapt to the various institutions. And I would say another superpower that I have is just owning my story. Like I own it, I shape it, I share it as often as possible. So being with you today that's part of my journey as an executive leader in advancement work, and being able to get other folks involved in the sector. My sector, there's not a lot of folks that look like me. So I want to, I know that I'm kind of being that representative for other women leaders of color who are doing fabulous work in the space and may need that visibility.
What advice would you have for someone that is trying to break into this sector, thinking about going into development or just working in higher ed overall? Like, how do they, one, break into the space, and any thoughts on how they can grow a career in the space?
Oh, absolutely. One thing is, I feel, don't just build your resume, like build your reputation. That matters more. Who you're connected to, who can say your name in a room when you're not there. that really matters when you're trying to break into this sector. And I think also, being open to learning and growing. Like I don't, even though I have these credentials, I do not at all feel like I come into an institution or space and feel like I know more than other people, because I feel like everyone brings something to the table, and so you have to learn and grow, and that's my model wherever I go. So if you're willing to be that advancement leader, that's willing to learn and grow, that's willing to bring their skills and talents with that entrepreneurial spirit of being able to move relationships, then you will have an absolutely great time at in this sector and doing these roles.
How do you continue to build your brand and your network and develop your skills, right? Like you've spoken about some of that already. Like you've spoken about getting your master's, continuing to learn, even some of the peer mentoring, right? But can you speak a little bit more to that, right? I think it's important to continue to own your entire brand as a professional. So we'd love for people to hear how you're doing that.
Absolutely. So I touched upon this, but I feel as if part of networking is also, you said it earlier, building my brand. So I'm constantly trying to meet new people. I also share my knowledge with whether it's, other groups of people, whether it's at an institution through the sorority, or I mentor other fundraisers that are up and coming and that, can learn from me and with my major and principal gift work. And I think that that's important because when you're sharing your time and talent in that way, that also allows people to build your brand for you. And sometimes, you don't realize it, but as you're teaching, as you're coaching and mentoring, they're learning and they're passing it on to other people. And that's really the hope, is for that to come full circle. So that's very important. Another piece of advice I would say is know when to pivot, because I knew when to pivot. It was time to pivot, leaving from being a counselor to figuring out what was going to be my life's work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're quitting. I think that people think that if they can't do something, that I'm quitting this. But I feel like there's power in knowing that this is not working out for me, and I need to understand what is going to work out for me and change direction. So that that really unlocks growth.
I completely agree with that, and I think knowing that is so pivotal. And when you had your administrative role, you could have, if that's what you wanted, that's great. But if you found out that that's not what you wanted and you were having some doubts, by you taking the leap to have conversations with people about it and then stepping into a whole new role at another organization, it's now unlocked a whole career trajectory for you that you probably couldn't have really envisioned at that time. But you just took the leap, right? And you said, you know what? I'm going to try this. Let's try to grow and learn something else. And if nothing else, if that doesn't work out, you already have a solid standing on other skill sets. So you can always refer back to that. But it is important, I think, to pivot and take leaps of faith like that.
And something else that comes to mind when it comes to branding is I always champion people publicly. I'm a big celebrator. I love to celebrate and recognize folks. So I feel like when I shine light on others, that really strengthens my leadership. And then I'm always about full circle. I think it comes back to me, and others see that example and they share what I do, how I am, to the broader community. And that's also another way to brand yourself.
Agreed. Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, right, like it sounds like you've been surrounded by good leaders throughout your career. And even early on, to have someone be more invested in you than in the work that you do for them is huge, right? To say, you know what, I think you should try something else, or I think you'd be great bringing your skill sets elsewhere. And like to have that early on in your career is so pivotal, because now you're able to like pass that down and you're able to like be that type of leader. So, I appreciate when we're surrounded by good leaders early on and we're able to like pull from all of that.
Yep. Yes, indeed. Like you. You've been a great leader, Radhy.
I'll tell you, I feel like Columbia, we definitely had some good leadership in our respective departments and all the things. So it was always a good learning lesson there.
In addition to earning my master's from Columbia University in nonprofit management, I'm also currently pursuing a doctoral degree from Montclair State University. I'm in the Family Science and Human Development program. And my research, I'm really interested in learning more and understanding research that's about poverty alleviation and generational wealth. And so my dissertation is really focusing on alumni philanthropists of color and their influences on student achievement and diverse families at Hispanic-serving institutions.
Wow. And what made you want to really pursue this PhD, and how far into the program are you?
I'm pretty far in there. Many years down the line. I'm pretty far in there. And so right now I am in the process of completing my data collection. Once that occurs, there's some more writing, a lot of analyzing, and hopefully defense of my dissertation within a year or two.
Was there a moment originally that made you want to pursue a PhD, right? Because I know, I personally know a few peers either in PhD programs or questioning if that's the next step for them. So like, what made you take that leap there?
Fabulous question. I love this question because I wanted to add my voice to the research regarding the philanthropic sector. And I realized very quickly that a lot of the research that was out there regarding families of color, people of color, were from a deficit-based lens. And I'm really looking forward to having my strength-based perspective and lens added to the sector, and to really bring people's awareness to the fact that families of color, people of color, we have our own cultural nuances as to why we do the things we do. And so there's just way too much research that's from a deficit lens. And I'm really looking forward to getting, and actually my whole cohort, we're all on the same base of strength-based approach to understanding mental health, to understanding philanthropy, to understanding real issues that happen and impact families. And that's really what motivated me. And I'm super excited to be doing this research and to have my voice, and to also share the lived experiences and voices of people of color.
That's great. And I know specifically, first, I appreciate you wanting to have that perspective in the research, right? I think it's important for more of us to have those lenses incorporated, especially not speaking from a deficit standpoint, and really speaking from both lived experience and both lived and professional experiences, mm-hmm. right? And, I also find it encouraging that you found a program that allows you to also work full time while doing it, right? I know for me, as someone that has considered and is considering a PhD program, mm-hmm. I will not go into a full-time program where I will not be working. Like, that's just not even an option for me, right? But having programs that are that allow some of that flexibility and allow you to continue to work and support your family during that time, I think it's very important and encouraging, specifically in this field.
Yes, and I will also add to that, Radhy, that I don't think people are aware, but there is less than 2% of PhD holders of color. And that's including Black, Latina folks. So At the end of the day, less than 2%. We are the minority of all the minorities when it comes to that doctoral credential. And one thing I want to assure, and I actually want folks to really understand and just be fearless. I was like, I'm going to take this leap of faith and I'm going to apply to this program because I feel like I can add value to current research. And that's the reason why I applied to the program. I'm sure if you really dig deep and think about how you want to affect change, and the PhD route is your route, go for it. And don't feel as if, I'm not smart enough, I'm not this enough. Listen, if there's one thing I can understand about this program is that I'm constantly learning and growing. There's constant edits to my document. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times my proposal and my dissertation is being edited. But you know what? It's okay, because you want to provide and put your best foot forward. And that's how you learn. And I feel that a lot of people kind of have this stigma like, I'm not smart enough to hold a PhD. And you absolutely are.
And, I know you've mentioned this is your calling and this is your vocation. For folks that are thinking about getting into development, is this a lucrative career? Can folks make a decent living in this space? Like, how much money can people actually expect to make 10, 20 years down the line?
Yes, I would say it is a lucrative career. And I feel as if like folks who are in sales would definitely thrive in this career. Folks who, or let's say they went into sales and then didn't really like how sales are. Like if you think about sales with a little side of social impact and community engagement, that's what this is about. So if that's something that you're interested in, it could be very lucrative for you, especially as you go up the ladder and you start leading teams, you start having campaigns under your belt where you're raising significant amounts of dollars for the institution. It could be very lucrative.
Awesome. So because it's the Cheat Code podcast, can you give us a sense of in higher ed, in development, right? When you're first starting out in development, like what are you looking at, like a $30,000 to $60,000 range? And as you move up, just I want people to have an understanding of kind of what a career here could look like. And it doesn't have to be specific numbers. And of course, it'll vary by university, by state, by all the things.
Sure, I can give you some ranges. So when you're first starting out, you may be in an assistant role, assistant director role. You're probably going to be in the 80 to 90,000 range or 70 to 90,000, actually consistent. It's probably a little lower. When you're a director, it could be six figures. And then let's say if you're a vice president, some vice presidents I know make, almost as much as some university presidents, $500,000.
Wow. Okay. See, and that's great, right? And, I think it's helpful for people to understand these numbers, right? And also to know that you can align impact with doing well for yourself, right? Because it's a very important role. Like if you're securing a lot of funds to advance university priorities, it's a lot of value that you're bringing to this institution, right? So that role should be well compensated. And those folks, that's really why those folks build a Rolodex of people that they then have relationships with, right? And that are external to the university and are able to tap into different priorities at different moments. So, I appreciate you sharing that because I do think it's important for people to just have an understanding of what it could look like.
And, something I want to make you aware of is that that's not typical for the nonprofit sector. So I think that probably working in higher is probably some of the greater salaries. Nonprofit work, typically, we're very undervalued for what we do because it's social impact, it's community driven, it's membership driven. A lot of it is, some donors do not want to pay for salaries. So it's all about the programming and it's all about, so the overhead is usually, nonprofits are usually struggling, especially grassroots, to figure out how to get that done. The sector itself is really undervalued. And so I will say that those numbers obviously are very generous that I quoted, but the reality is that we have a long way to go to really, in the nonprofit sector, to really get people really living a life that's worth value and that can. But the thing is that it's about what drives you. So a lot of people are driven by the impact of that nonprofit, so they don't mind working for less. But I would say that as the sector's changing and we're starting to realize that the value of our roles in the nonprofit sector, it is going up. I will say that. And I feel like I've seen, especially on LinkedIn, a lot of recruiters that are actually calling attention to the fact that some nonprofits are just it's not realistic, the salaries that they're there. And I feel like that's good news for the sector because it's showing that historically people were like, oh, well, you're working for a nonprofit, you don't make any money. But that shouldn't really be the case. It should be that you're bringing this tremendous value, you're having social impact, you're having the community thriving because of what your organization is doing. So the salary should reflect that. And I feel like there's a turning point right now in the nonprofit sector where they're starting to recognize that nonprofit folks need to get paid more.
I love that. And I appreciate you sharing that, right? Because I will say part of the reason why I started this podcast is to show that nexus, right? Like I was working, at the time I was working at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And I saw that working in city government, you can make a good amount of money. And to me, a good amount of money as someone that grew up at the poverty line in New York City.
Yes.
You're making six figures. You're like that is ridiculous to me. I'm like, wait, there are city jobs that you can do this with? I always thought city jobs were like low wages, but you're there for the pension or something. I'm like, and the benefits. I'm like, okay, well, that's not true. Then you look at philanthropy and you're like, wait, you guys are making how much money to do really good work? Like, so, I realize that there's a really big intersection between the impact that you can have and how good and well you can do. I appreciate you sharing that, because I do think higher ed is specifically one of those sectors that can provide a good living. Nonprofits as well, I think, depending on the size of the organizations, but there are some nonprofit work that you can do, and you can be in leadership positions and make really good money, and really be aligned with the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you sharing that there.
Absolutely. Happy to help. And, you said something that was very important, and that's the fact that if this sector changes lives, right? And it allows opportunities for those who are below poverty to get out of poverty. And that's something that I think is the reason why a lot of folks, that mission-driven approach is why a lot of folks are in the sector. But, it has to be reflective of the good work that we're doing. And I feel as if we're going in the right direction, and that makes me happy and positive that this sector is growing, and it will stay for a while, for a long time.
Are there any books, podcasts, movies, any other forms of media that you have consumed that have helped you personally or professionally? And I'll give you some examples. So I've had people literally say the Bible, right? I've had people say different subscriptions that they get, so weekly newsletters that just help them get a broader understanding of their sector. I've had people say the Wall Street Journal, right, or whatever. So wondering if there are any, or it could be something like Tuesdays with Maury, right? Like whatever right. you've consumed that has just shaped your perspective personally or professionally that you think people here should consume.
Certainly. So I watched this podcast called Career Cheat Code.
Hey, that's right. That's right. That's right.
I mean, in addition to watching that Career Cheat Code podcast.
That's right. That's right.
This really good guy, Radhy. That is an excellent question.
We don't even need an answer after that. I think that's the best answer, honestly. We just got it there.
No, but it's funny because, so I'm going to put this out there, but I've known you for so many years since Columbia, and I knew you were doing this podcast, and I was just like, oh, this, and I would catch you, and I'm like, man, Radhy's doing some great work. He's doing some great work. And, I was just like, when we reconnected a couple months ago, I was like, let me look at his podcast again. I'm like, what I really appreciate about your podcast is that you really touch upon a broad array of positions and levels of positions. And, you're really bringing to light for people of color the opportunities that exist. And I really appreciate that. It's just very authentic. And so I just want to say thank you for doing that, because I feel like our communities need more career cheat codes, because people are just not aware of the tremendous opportunity that's out there in regards to careers and how you can uplift your family out of poverty sometimes. And, it could be deeply personal. And so I love that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Is there anything else we haven't discussed that the world should know about Yanira?
Oh, wow. I will share, that I come from humble beginnings. So as soon as you said below poverty line, right there resonated with me. Again, this work is deeply personal for me. I was raised by a single mother who really gave all she had to make sure that my brother and I had a better future. And so I do this work because I've lived the reality of financial hardship. And I know, what a scholarship, a mentor, and a warm meal can mean for a student or family. And so that really helps me to create access and build equity for students' lives. If there's one thing that I want folks to take away, it is that everything I do is with integrity and love. And so for me, I feel like philanthropy, it just becomes a way for folks to reimagine what's possible for entire communities. And that's really a calling I'm proud to answer every day.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing this. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and believe on the mission we're on, please like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're using, and share this podcast with your friends in your networks. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Career Cheat Code, and tell us people or careers you would like to see highlighted. See you next week with some more cheat codes. Peace.